Names have often defined who we are and what we will become. This was an old concept that biblical times had for names. Whatever name you had, it would define your destiny. For example, Abraham's name means father of many, representing how he would be a father to many nations. Isaac's name means laughter, representing Abraham's amazement that he could bear a son at an old age. Jacob's name would be changed to Israel, which means wrestling with God, representing how future Israel would fight, wrestle, and provoke God into anger. As much as we don't look at names anymore to define us, Steven Spielberg emphasized the importance of names in Schindler's List as a way of giving back the Jewish stolen identity during the horrors of the Holocaust by the German Nazis. I'll be taking a closer look at how names matter in Schindler's List to remind us of one of the biggest human massacres in history, those that saved them, those that were vile and cruel, and the ones that were victims of these events. So fair warning, cause this will have spoiler alerts.
You shouldn't get stuck on names. That's right. It creates a lot of paperwork.
The film was based off from a book published in 1982 about a German Nazi named Oskar Schindler who saved more than 1,000 Jewish lives, defying what was in his time a war to annihilate the entire Jewish race in the whole planet. That same year, the book was passed down to Steven Spielberg with the hope of making something out of it, like a movie, which he passed down at first. He was not used at tackling dark and serious subject matters like the Holocaust in 1982. He made his career out of making feel-good, action-adventure, blockbuster films.
I wasn't really ready in my own life because I was making movies about extraterrestrials and movies about, Indiana Jones and sharks and...
But as the years went on, Spielberg tested himself as a serious director when he made The Color Purple and Empire of the Sun. The success of these films would prepare Spielberg to tackle a bigger subject matter, the Holocaust. Not to mention the Holocaust denial was starting to grow in the early 90s. The film was a personal story for Spielberg, since he is a Jew after all. It helped him reconcile with his Jewish heritage when before he was ashamed for getting bullied as a kid.
My shame about being Jewish because I was being raised in Gentile neighborhoods, going to Gentile schools, and I was the object of a lot of discrimination because I was the only Jew.
It also helped him present the Holocaust into its true, violent nature, when compared to Hollywood's sugar-coated depiction that undermined the millions of losses. Between the 40s and the 60s, Hollywood was very sensitive in tackling the subject matter of the Holocaust, except when it came to ridiculing Hitler. Since they were still following the censorship code at that time, which forbid the usage of vulgar language, nudity, heavy use of violence, and the mandatory need of a happy ending, they couldn't show the true horrific nature of the Holocaust. European films and documentaries were blunt enough to show actual footages and real grim pictures inside those concentration camps, and they would not pull back from having a depressing ending. After all, they were speaking from their traumatic experience with the war, how it destroyed millions of lives afterwards. American films, on the other hand, focus on safe subject matters that dealt with post-war consequences, instead of the losses the Jews acquired during the war. Hollywood would Americanize the Holocaust into edifying, positive messages that were relevant to their audience, like villainizing the Nazis, tackling anti-Semitism with Crossfire and the Gentleman's Agreement.
That's anti-Semitism.
Some people don't like other people just because they're Jews.
The Jews returning back to the Middle East in Exodus, the trial of Nazi officers after the war in Judgment of Nuremberg, and the Diary of Anne Frank would be the most optimistic depiction of the Holocaust thus far.
I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are really good at heart.
Once in a while they would go dark in The Pawnbroker, about a Holocaust survivor suffering from PTSD. But rarely it would speak on behalf of the Holocaust survivors. Instead, it would be diminished as background for a simpler American depiction of the Holocaust that said, everything went well in the end, for us.
While most of the world celebrated the end of 6 years of war, there was no happy ending for the Jews. For them, the moment of liberation came too late. Entire communities had been wiped out.
Even though Schindler's List can fall into the trap of romanticizing the outcome of the war, or certain individuals that would be remembered for something.
Oskar Schindler, they'll say. He did something extraordinary.
it remained faithful to its historical brutality of expulsion, savagery, torture, enslavement, and the countless of lost lives.
Tomorrow, you'll begin the process of looking for survivors of your families. In most cases, you won't find them.
Spielberg insisted the film be shot in black and white instead of color in order to give it a sense of a documentary, intending not to entertain, but to educate. It would also give it an artistic touch when the color at the opening fades away, foreshadowing the darkness that was ahead. The Jews are not played down into minor background roles. They have personalities and their own mini subplots. You remember the little girl and the mother, the two young black market lovers, the rabbi, the abused maid, the boy, Itzhak Stern, who falsified Jewish papers so he could save more Jews.
It was not right. It's very good. He's 53 years old. It's too new.
Their names would be often repeated and printed in big words on the screen so we could memorize them.
What's her name?
Helen Hirsch.
What?
Helen Hirsch.
What? I can't hear.
Helen Hirsch.
The repetition of names seemed more like a counterfeit to how the Nazis took away their names once inside the camps, replacing it with tattoo numbers instead, ultimately stripping them of their humanity, labeling them as subhuman. The names play a role to return back the victim's identity as humans.
My name is Diana Reiter. I'm a graduate of civil engineering from the University of Milan.
As they all say their names, there is a point when the camera gets closer to their faces, getting personal as making sure we remember the names of the survivors.
Hillman Edward.
Erna Rodberg. Zuckerman Jotti.
So once we get to the ending with the actors alongside with the survivors they play, we realize that these were actual people who faced near-death experiences and for the longest time were ignored. As a result of the film, Spielberg started the Shoah Foundation that archived the testimony of many Holocaust survivors. And it would start this trend of Holocaust Oscar baits that went popular after, with Life is Beautiful, The Pianist, Downfall, Inglourious Basterds, Jojo Rabbit, and so on. Some of them would be more successful, others like Jacob the Liar would not. Oskar Schindler's name can represent what later defined him. Schindler's name means shingle, which is a rooftop. Not only does it describe his industrial work ethic, but it also represents how he would be a shelter roof for many lives.
Oskar, there are 1,100 people who are alive because of you. Look at them.
Now, we never tend to ask, why does a hero do good deeds? We often tend to ask, why does a villain do bad deeds? Because it's more fascinating to look at their downfall from grace. But in this exception, why did Schindler save Jewish lives? Part of what makes it fascinating is that he first started as a villain.
I'm a member of the Nazi Party. I'm a profiteer of slave labor. I am a criminal.
As if it wasn't enough to say he was a Nazi, he was also a womanizer, a drunkard, an opportunist, a war profiteer, and a master manipulator. Even the real Schindler started as a Nazi spy and was responsible for Germany invading Poland. In the movie, his biggest flaw is greed.
I've got 350 workers on the factory floor with one purpose.
To make pots and pans?
To make money. For me.
He's an industrialist who at first exploits his Jewish workers for personal gain.
What if I got here 5 minutes later? Then where would I be?
So with all of his flaws, he would be the last candidate to save anyone but himself. Plus, any Nazi back then was brainwashed to hate a Jew at the spot. So what led him to go from a villain into a hero? Well, one theory to why he did not hate the Jews could go back from his upbringing. He was born in a region populated by Jews in Germany, which means he must have known some of those Jewish kids and gone along with them pretty well. Again, this is just a theory. By the time he was older, the Nazi propaganda of the subhuman Jew might have not worked for him, demonstrated by how he would respect his workers, getting to know them, getting familiar with them.
I know them. I'm familiar with them.
Years later, some of the survivors would recall how Schindler knew them by their names, and years later would still remember them by their names.
Mulder Pfefferberg, Miller Pfefferberg, Fischer, Ishmael Fischer.
Again, emphasizing their humanity and recognizing their value when others wouldn't.
I lost a worker.
A one-armed machinist?
He was a metal press operator. Quite skilled.
So we can assume that Schindler did not care about the Nazi ideals about race superiority. He just joined them to gain a profit out of them.
By law, I have to tell you, sir, I'm a Jew.
Well, I'm a German, so there we are.
In real life, as the massacre towards Jews increased, Schindler started to act against the Germans, not only bribing the SS officers to give him back his workers, on the risk of losing his life if they discovered his intentions of saving lives, which got him into prison twice.
I could have you arrested.
But would also intentionally misfabricate the German guns so they wouldn't work.
Stan, if this factory ever produces a shell that can actually be fired, I'll be very unhappy.
Even though the real Schindler had nothing to do with the list, and his Jewish workers were still considered slaves in his camp, at least they were better protected, better taken, and well fed.
There will be no summary executions here. There will be no interference of any kind with production.
In the movie, his redemptive arc is more of a slow build-up from the man who only loved money.
I've done what I came here for. I've got more money than any man can spend in a lifetime.
Into the man that would give up all of his money to save lives, gaining nothing in return, leaving him broke for the rest of his life after the war was over.
I threw away so much money. You have no idea.
He doesn't agree with the Germans' killings, but he's also reluctant into saving anyone.
He wants to kill everybody? Great! What am I supposed to do about it? Bring everybody over?
He's at first suggested by Isaac Stern to slowly save a life one by one, but as the killing against Jews increased, he gets an epiphany with the little girl on the red coat, representing the red flag that everyone ignored. When he receives the epiphany for the second time with the little girl dead, that's when he snaps into writing the names he would save. Schindler's story is a fascinating one because it inspires redemption. He was a flawed man whose imperfections were overshadowed by his great act of goodness when he had nothing to gain from it.
They say your factory is a haven. They say you are good.
In media, these redemptive stories serve as an inspiration that no matter how flawed someone is or how far they have gone, there is always a way to be redeemed with the right help of someone. Such examples in media from villains turned good could be from the likes of Loki, Gru, Harley Quinn, Vegeta, Darth Vader, and Snape. In biblical times, the Apostle Paul started as a villain, first hunting down Christians and the 12 disciples of Jesus, but after his vision from Christ, he was redeemed into writing most of the New Testament. In today's sage, such as Danny Trejo was able to turn his life around after being in prison, or former Senator Robert Byrd, who was a former KKK member until he gave up those ideals. But just as something like this can be inspirational, so can going from good to bad become a cautionary tale, that no matter how good you are, you can lose your halo at any moment, turning into a monster.
They're not gone. They're here.
They're mine!
Just as it is important to remember the name of the victims, so it is remembering the name of the ones who did the atrocity. Ignoring them and the reason why they did it is like ignoring the cause of the pain, and when it does happen again, we won't know what was the reason or how to fix it. So as much as we give too much attention to serial killers, it is necessary to give them some attention. Amon Goeth embodies the Nazi ideals that were imprinted in him: hate, violence, racism, intolerance. Amon's name means faithful, and Goeth means a shovel that pours water. But his Nazi ideals distorted his identity into representing a shovel that buries people instead.
Shoot her.
Herr Kommandant, I'm only trying to do my job.
Yeah, I'm doing mine.
The real Amon, as in the movie, were notorious for shooting hundreds of workers with a rifle on top of their balcony just for fun. What the movie wouldn't show was his more sadistic side of torturing, beating up Jewish workers for hours until they died, or having his dogs tear them apart while still alive. Part of what makes a villain fascinating in fiction, as in reality, is their incapability to change. In the film, Amon isn't just a cold-blooded killer as he was in real life. He's made much more complicated and in some ways a tragic soul that is incapable to change his ideals of hate.
He shot the woman from the steps because she meant nothing to him.
Something that makes a hero stand out from the villain is their commitment to sacrifice something in order to change. Schindler sacrificed his love of money, thus turning him into a better person. Amon is someone who's beyond change. No matter how hard he tries, he can't suppress his crave for killing.
He's a wonderful crook. A man who loves good food, good wine, the ladies, making money, killing.
They're both Nazis with power, but their ideals of power is what sets them apart.
Power is when we have every justification to kill, and we don't.
Schindler uses power to save lives, even when he knows he can take it away if he wants to.
Try, and I will have you arrested. I swear to God.
Amon uses power to spread fear through his killings.
We have the fucking power to kill, that's why they fear us.
And just as Schindler finds redemption in the end, Amon is someone who just can't. When Schindler tries to manipulate him on showing mercy to the Jews, with the promise of being known as a great man, it works at first in one of the few funnier lines in the movie.
Go ahead, go and leave, I pardon you.
As well as opening up to his forbidden lust to his Jewish maid.
I feel for you, Helen.
But unfortunately, forgiveness doesn't satisfy him. Showing mercy does not empower him, and goes back being the abusive, cold-blooded killer that he's now remembered for the most.
No, I don't think so. You're a Jewish bitch.
Even his future family members would feel trouble that he's related to them.
She should know that I'm not like my father.
And I was so scared because I asked myself, do I carry something of him?
The focus of names was to compare how one side diminished those names as meaningless or just paperwork that made no difference if they were all wiped out.
Makes no difference to us, you understand? This one, that one, the inconvenience to the list.
While another side finds value in those names because they're just as important as any other human.
The list is an absolute good. The list is life.
The film serves as a way to remember that these names were real people that went through persecution and survived to tell their story. In a time when it's been attempted to forget the Holocaust ever happened, or just plain simply deny it, diminishing those 6 million lost lives as worthless. So what we can get is that ignorance can come from anywhere, at any time. Hate and bigotry always come from ignorance that can lead into erasing historical atrocities to serve a political agenda. And quite possibly, Schindler's List might be more relevant to this date on cautioning us about erasing the truth, diminishing valuable lives as meaningless, and the rise of hate toward different ethnic groups. That's why the names matter in Schindler's List, from the biggest to the small ones, in order to remember that these were real atrocities, and not to forget those who caused it, those who lost everything, and the ones who found meaning in those names.